another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and today's guest is Dr. Madeleine Castellanos. Madeleine is a practicing psychiatrist who specializes in sex therapy. In her practice, she uses a functional approach both physically and psychologically in order to get at the root cause of difficulties rather than just chasing symptoms without true resolution. In addition to her sex therapy, she provides bioidentical hormone replacement as well as functional medicine counseling to her patients. She is the author of the Amazon #1 bestseller, Wanting to Want, What Kills Your Sex Life and How to Keep. Apart from her own private practice, Dr. Castellanos has appeared both on local and national television and has been featured in several publications including Men's Health, Women's Health, Fox.com, Salon.com, Cosmopolitan, Parents.com, and AARP. She also provides a wealth of information on sex and sexuality through her own blog, thesexmd.com. She lives in New York City. Welcome, Madeleine.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Thank you. I am really excited that I had the opportunity to meet you a few weeks ago at a functional forum and to learn more about what you offer, the services that you offer, and your passion really for going beyond masking symptoms and looking for the root cause of imbalances and issues for people, specifically related to their sex life.
Yeah, it's so important, and I think that's what we really need, because otherwise we're never really taking care of the problem. We're just putting a little Band-Aid on it, and then it continues to go out throughout your life. So why not deal with it right at the root and solve it once and for all?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, my philosophy as a chiropractor is really looking for that. And, it's really refreshing to meet a medical doctor who shares that philosophy of really practicing functional medicine and, addressing, whether it's a hormonal imbalance or other psychological root issues that the symptoms are sexual dysfunction rather than that being the primary cause.
Well, Thank you. No, it was great to meet you, too, and I think this is very important work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. So today, because our audience is women, preconception through early motherhood, we're going to talk about sex after baby. And we're going to cover a little bit about, the preconception and sex during pregnancy, but definitely for a lot of families, issues come up after the baby's born. So that will be our focus for today's episode. So if we could just start off by talking about the beginning, right? A family is wanting to conceive, and they're consciously, trying to get pregnant. Can you talk about some fertility challenges that might occur during that process?
I think the biggest fertility challenge that people have nowadays is just the pace at which we live. And stress is such a big part of our lives now, more than ever, and even though email and social media and everything is supposed to make our lives easier, it really has added much more stress to our lives, even without us knowing. And evolutionarily speaking, we've evolved, our physical body and our mind have evolved to function at a much slower pace with these little episodes of stress here and there, but then you recover and it's fine. But nowadays we have this unending stress that gets translated into physical symptoms because it activates our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response, so our stress response. And what that does is it increases stress hormones in our body, adrenaline and cortisol. And so fertility can be part of those stresses because nowadays women find themselves also focusing a lot on career, so many women are choosing to put off having their first child until later in life. And so then when it comes to the time when a couple feels that they're ready, it's almost like there's even more stress. Well, we have to do this because we don't have as much time left, right? And without realizing that stress, just those thoughts repeatedly, can create a very stressful environment in the body and translate into more inflammation and actually make it more difficult to conceive.
Right. Yeah, it's a cascade of really biochemistry, and, you know, one biochemical change is impacting another hormone, and it's the neuroendocrine system. You know, it's all connected, and all those different glands and organs are feeding off of each other. So if those little adrenals are pumping those fight or flight hormones with adrenaline, it is going to throw off the sex hormones and the thyroid hormones and the other hormones that impact fertility.
Absolutely. So what I always tell couples is, you know, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on what you want. And when you're talking about conscious conception, you're creating an environment where you want to get kind of mentally in the zone to maximize your fertility. And there's a difference between that and what I've just talked about with having that stress and making it a stress for yourself. So when you are going to be practicing conscious conception, it's like anything else in life that you want to manifest. You really need to visualize what that is like and actually visualize what it feels like, because your body will put into action whatever your mind focuses on. And that's just the way we're designed to work. The body reflects what the mind thinks. So you need to visualize that, but then you need to also then let it go. So you need to imagine and visualize it like it's already happening, like you're already pregnant, like you're feeling that baby growing inside of you, like that energy is flowing and spiraling in your belly. And then you need to allow yourself to feel the joy around that, and then you need to let it go. Because it's only when you do let it go that then you can manifest that. And without letting it go, you enter that stress cascade, which then works against you actually getting there. So I think it's important to make those two distinctions, too. When people say visualize it, I see people say, okay, I think about it all the time, and I don't understand. I said, okay, well, you've moved into the stress part of it, where you're so attached to that outcome that you don't really believe that it can happen, and that's why you're in that stress response. But yeah, the big difference.
Thank you so much for differentiating that, because that is so true. I think a lot of people that maybe have watched The Secret or are familiar with visualization, you know, and manifesting, they forget about how, you know, overly focusing and really having that deep-rooted subconscious fear can really block that manifestation from coming into your life, because it's because of like an obsession, especially regarding a woman wanting to get pregnant, and it's detrimental.
Right. Well, you know, one of the main things about my book that one of the main messages I really want people to understand in my book is that what happens to you psychologically gets translated into physical symptoms. And that's why I think it's so important to approach, you know, so much about sexuality through what's happening psychologically, because, yes, you can come to me with a symptom, but I need to find out what's driving that. And so when I talk about this getting translated into your body, if you're having a lot of stress and putting a lot of pressure and stress on yourself about, like, I have to get pregnant, you are increasing inflammation in your body, which is changing the environment in your uterus and fallopian tubes. And so that's actually going to work against implantation. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you can visualize, you can allow yourself to feel that joy, and then, of course, then you let it go, and you don't create that stress.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of our listeners, it's that realization that if you're not feeling those happy, joyful, positive type of emotions regarding, you know, fertility and getting pregnant, then that's your body is telling you, like, those thoughts need to be shifted. If it's becoming more stressful and scheduled, like, okay, we have to, you know, I'm ovulating, things have to happen on this way. It's too structured, it's too stressed, it's too out of alignment and out of joy, you know, and that's going to create issues.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad that you just really pointed that out. We had a guest on here a few episodes ago, Molly Nichols from Mind Belly Connection, and she beautifully, eloquently shared with the audience about how the mind is the most powerful fertility organ, you know, because we can really use it to create whatever we want. and she teaches women how to do that. And then to follow up with that, it's that realization that if the visualization is becoming like becoming work, if it's becoming laborious, then that's like, okay, we have to step back here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is that conception, if you think about it, is really a yin energy. And when you move into that, I have to get pregnant, I must do this, you're really working in a very yang energy. And it's a very directive, assertive energy, which has its place in the world, but is not the same thing as that receptive energy that is yin, which is how conception really happens. So I think that's also important for women to think about, and they can feel that energy shift.
Yeah, wow. Both of us are in the New York City area, and so the women I'm sure that you probably see in your office, and I know I see in mine, are a little more yang, a little more masculine. They're very driven in their careers, and when it comes to conception as well as certainly pregnancy and especially birth, it's really recognizing that the feminine is really what is the most powerful energy to utilize during that phase of your life.
Absolutely. I'm still baffled by those people who schedule their births. I don't understand it, because the baby and the mother's body work together to really have birth at the exact time that is the perfect time for that baby.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important to understand that energy shift and really realize, are you trying to direct it in a very yang way, or are you letting it proceed the way it's naturally supposed to?
Right. Yeah, the yin, the feminine, is about creation, and that's what pregnancy is and birth. So, that's so powerful, but it is about not controlling. It's about surrendering. It's about being vulnerable. And these can be challenging emotions for a woman who is very high-powered in her career and is used to calling the shots. And it's such
absolutely.
A shift in her identity. But it's such an important shift to consciously want if you're choosing to become a mother.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. So shifting gears, once a woman has successfully, become pregnant, are there any challenges that can happen to maintaining a healthy sex life during the pregnancy?
Well, absolutely. I think there's challenges both psychological and in the relationship, as well as physical challenges. And although programs like yours are making a huge difference with people, our society otherwise doesn't really help women out a great deal, because not much is talked about it, just like sexuality in older age also, something that is just not included in mainstream for the most part. So as far as pregnancy goes, there's going to be tremendous amounts of hormone shifts, and your body's going to change. So physically, there are lots of challenges. In the first trimester, usually women don't feel so good, and they're feeling nauseous, they're feeling bloated, they might have breast tenderness, and so they're not really sure what's happening with their body. Not everybody, of course, I'm speaking in generalities, and there's a lot of individual differences. But because of these changes, women just physically don't always feel so sexy. And it's hard if you're feeling nauseous, right, to feel very amorous. And that's okay. You have to give yourself permission to let your body go through the stages that it's going to go through. Now, again, other women don't have any difficulties in their first trimester, or the difficulties only last a couple of days, or a week, so they have a little bit easier time of it. And then as the pregnancy progresses, usually the second trimester is when couples are having the most amount of sex in pregnancy. So she's usually feeling a little bit better. Hormones have finished their huge exponential, rise, and they're more of a plateau. So things are more stable with her body, and she's not really having, issues with having to change positions or stuff, because her belly's not that big yet. Once she moves into the third trimester, it could be more difficult because she's going to be much more tired. she's going to want to take long naps in the afternoon, and then the physical challenge of positions that work and feel comfortable for her. So those are the physical challenges on her end. There's also psychological aspects, and this is where, for the male partners, it really comes into play. And even though we know that having regular sexual activity doesn't hurt the baby in any way, shape, or form, the truth is some guys are just a little freaked out. And I always tell people, look, you have to meet people where they're at. You're not going to, bang into their head a whole different idea. You can just gently lead them and hope that they follow. So still a lot of guys think, oh, I'm going to be hurting the baby. I'm going to warp the baby or make him perverted in some way because he's going to be so close to my penis because we're having intercourse. He's right there. It's amazing that people really still, and I gently try to tell them, no, it's going to be okay. And the uterus is designed to protect that fetus while it's growing. And it's really no more strenuous than her riding in a car and going over a speed bump. I promise you. So sometimes people get it, and sometimes they still have a little mental image to it that keeps them from really being sexual about it. I think the most difficult part is when people, both men and women, have very, very rigid ideas of what motherhood is, and they don't feel it's compatible with being a sexual person. And for those people, I think the challenges are much greater. So those are the people that feel like, if I shouldn't be doing this because it's not proper because now I'm a mother. Or on the other side, men will say, well, now she's a mother, and therefore I can't see her as someone very sexual anymore. And those are big challenges. Sometimes guys don't feel that way psychologically, but physically when they see their partner with a growing belly, they can't get sexual with them. And, I also tell women, listen, don't, again, it's probably going to take longer to change their idea than the entirety of your pregnancy. So that's when you use, pillows strategically placed, or you decide to change the lighting, or you change positions, or you change his hand placement on you so that he doesn't, if he's bothered by the sight of your belly growing during the second and third trimester, that he can have sexual intercourse with you and not have that be the one thing on his mind. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly.
Sure. Takes the focus off of it.
It takes the focus off of it, and some women will get very angry and say, you should love a woman's body no matter what.
Right.
And I agree. I totally agree. But I know from experience, because I see these people come through my office, that there's some guys that are just like, I want to, doctor, I really do, but there's something inside of me that just turns me off. And I want some women to know that doesn't mean that they don't love you, and that doesn't mean that they're not aroused by you. It's just something in their unconscious that doesn't click with that. And so you just make adjustments for that period of time. And that's
right.
Okay.
It's temporary. Yeah.
It's temporary.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. There's obviously some deep-rooted things going on there, but the amount of time it would take to really get to it, the pregnancy is probably already over.
Right. And, and again, it doesn't mean that they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they're not attracted to you. That's something that's in their unconscious that they probably don't even have access to change. Yeah. So you make adjustments for it, and you move on, I think. But It is a challenge for couples.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what about after the woman has given birth and the baby's here? How does that impact the sex life?
Wow, tremendous changes. I think the overriding difficulty is just a lack of energy. I mean, she's going to be very fatigued, and she's really not getting as much sleep as she needs. So it's very difficult to feel sexy and have energy for sex when you are exhausted. Now, right after birth, you have a big shift in hormones. So generally doctors recommend that you wait 4 to 6 weeks after delivery just for the body to heal. And in that time also it helps the hormones get a little bit more balanced out because you have such a big shift that your ovaries now like get the wake-up call and say, oh, okay, we're going to start doing this whole ovulation thing again. I got it. But that takes a while. And so before that happens, a woman can have a lot of dryness. She's not going to lubricate as well. She could have a burning sensation. And so she has to deal with the hormonal changes. If she's breastfeeding, which I hope that every woman out there is trying if they're able to breastfeed, because such benefits, not just for the baby, for her too. And we could talk about that if you like. But breastfeeding is going to prolong the time that she has a lot of prolactin in her system. And prolactin is what helps her produce milk and lactate, but it also makes you tired. And it works against sexual arousal because it has this opposite effect with other neurotransmitters in your brain. So prolactin it's one of this, what we call satiety hormones. So it makes you feel totally fine and happy and like you don't need anything else. So there's not much sexual arousal happening for a lot of people when their prolactin levels are high. So you have
I never even heard of that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's actually one of the things that we check when people have low sexual desire. We check their prolactin levels to make sure that they're not elevated. And people that have pituitary tumors can have high prolactin and lose complete sexual desire and arousal. Yeah, because of prolactin. So there's the physical changes that happen with birth. So if she's had a vaginal birth, she wants to make sure to have complete healing from that and have her muscle tone come back a little bit. It's not going to completely come back in the 4 to 6 weeks, but that definitely helps the tissues in the vagina also heal. You want her hormones to balance out, and she needs to get some sleep. The other thing, too, that a lot of women experience right after birth is that their body is just different, and a lot of people find that they lose hair, that their skin changes, because the baby really takes so many nutrients out of the mother's body, and that's the way it's designed to be. But we know this now, and some women really need to supplement with vitamins after birth. So that's something to consider too. A healthy sex life,
like staying on the prenatal vitamins.
Right. And some women need to take extra biotin. Some women need extra magnesium. So it's really important if you do have any of those physical changes to check and see if you need more supplementation. But absolutely, right. So there's a lot to think of. There's the physical and the psychological too. So one of the things that's it's so tough for women is when you are a caretaker and when you are just giving, to then switch into that erotic not mommy mode, the erotic, sexual woman mode, switching away from mommy mode. And that's tough. And it's one of the things that I talk about in my book when in wanting to want, because feeling disconnected or being distracted doesn't let you really get into sexual pleasure. And for some women, it's very difficult to switch from mommy mode and that nurturing, caretaking mode into the sexual woman, which is really, if you think about it, a more selfish kind of mode. And I mean selfish in a good way. Okay, I don't want people to think it's a negative thing. Selfish in that, hey, I want to share this with you right now. And it doesn't matter anybody else on the planet, I'm going to get my needs met right now. And that's really important for sexual arousal with a partner. So if women become distracted because they're either thinking about the baby, or they can smell the baby, or they see the baby's clothes, or sometimes even something as minor as that can prevent them from switching over into that erotic, sexy partner mode. And that's very important, to be able to have that flexibility to go from one to the other, because especially with the newborn, they demand so much of you that you start to feel like anybody that needs anything from you is just one more chore you have to do. And I think that that's a very common complaint sometimes women have, is they say, I feel just like my husband's like one more thing I have to take care of. So those women are not in sexy erotic mode. They're still in nurturing, caretaking mode.
That's such a good point. It's then it's like, oh, sex is a chore and I'm only doing it to keep my husband happy. And it's like, well, yeah, it's wonderful for your relationship, but what about for your own needs, and having that selfish time, it's almost really like a form of self-care.
Absolutely. But it's so difficult because that nurturing, caretaking mode prevents you from seeing it as something that that you can really relish in and need. It's hard for you to switch over. It's hard for women to switch over into the sexy mode if they're so caught up in that caretaking mode. So the first step is to really identify if that's happening, and then the second part is to, find out what do you need to do to get reconnected with that, with the sexual pleasure aspect, with the sensuality, with the, hey, my sexuality has its own space that I'm going to create for it and protect. And that doesn't take away from me being a mom and doesn't take away from me caretaking. In fact, one thing that I tell women is, it's very important that you keep that, and it's important that you do that for your kids, because do you want your kids just to think of women as simply servants, taking care of all your needs, or do they also enjoy their life, and do they also have a very vibrant sense of sensuality and happiness? And kids can sense the difference, maybe not a newborn, but later on in life, kids will know the difference. So you're not just doing it for you, you're doing it for your kids as well. You're showing them what it means to have that flexibility by modeling it for them.
Wow, that is so powerful, that healthy balance and recognizing that as a mom, taking care of your needs first are actually going to really be so beneficial for the whole family dynamic.
Yeah, it's true. It's very important.
Wow, that's great. And so do you have any tips for a woman who might recognize that it is hard for her to shift from caretaker to sexy mama?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the book, at the end of each chapter, I give and one of the ways to get reconnected is, I talk about doing, in a sense, it's kind of like mindfulness around your sexuality and your sensuality. So things like when you take a shower, especially women that have newborn babies, their body almost feels like it doesn't even belong to them anymore, right? That it just belongs to the baby, and that they're just a feeding machine, and that they're changing diapers, and they lose the sense of that pleasure for themselves. So I tell them, take time when you have a moment, have someone else take care of the baby, take a nice shower, and go slowly and see what it feels like just to run your hand and soap your entire body up. And if you can take pleasure in what that feels like, apart from anybody else, just for yourself, and that's a mindfulness exercise in sensuality. Or similarly, if you lay in bed and do a little relaxing breathing and put your hand on your heart and see if you can feel your heartbeat. And then once you are attuned to that, try to see if you can sense your heartbeat without having your hand there by just how it feels in your body. And all of these are ways to really get more connected with yourself physically that doesn't have to do with someone else demanding something of you. Mm-hmm. And, you just reconnecting in the sensations of your own body. Now, I don't mean to make it sound as if caring for an infant is negative. I think that everything that a mother does is absolutely the most beautiful thing in the world, and I think it's our perfect design. And it's so special in that way. But when we also live in a time where we're the only ones that take care of our babies. And, when we were evolving into the creatures that we are now, we had a societal structure where there was a lot more joint care. And so it got spread out a little bit more, and you could have a more personal sense of your own physical self. And so to deal with that nowadays, we do have to do some of these exercises just so that we can be able to be more flexible and be into that role. So some more mindfulness exercises around sexuality that can involve actual sensual touching of yourself in whichever way helps you connect the best.
Wow, that sounds great. And maybe even like some essential oils or, bringing in the senses of, aromatherapy.
Yeah, whichever way works best for you. Aromatherapy is fantastic because women have such a keen sense of smell, and it matters. It really activates their limbic system much more so than in men. So the aromatherapies are fantastic, or anything that you find really pleasing, because that is going to be able to turn off your thinking part of your brain and get to that emotional part of your brain that's really involved in arousal. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm hearing from you is that, it's like you mentioned, we're not in these tribes anymore, that there's a whole community of women that are helping to take care of this newborn. A lot of women, don't have families locally and aren't having that support structure. So somehow creating support, so it's not even necessarily your partner, but it's a postpartum doula, or if you have, a family member who's available, somebody to help with child care and even just household care so that you can have time for yourself is so important.
Yeah. I think a lot of new mothers, if they don't have that help, they end up feeling very isolated and like in their homes, and like everything falls on their shoulders, and that's very tough. It's exhausting mentally and physically. So yeah, absolutely, to get that support system.
Yeah, because it's even beyond just taking care of a baby and taking care of yourself. It is, for a lot of women, it might be like running a household, and then if there's other children involved, there's other child care stuff. So delegating and getting support in managing these other areas of your life will free up that time that you need to do some of these exercises.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, let's say this family has grown, and they've gone from one baby to 2 or 3 children now. Do you have any suggestions for women and families of how to really maintain a sexy health life, with multiple children, different ages, and perhaps like why that's important, why that's something that we consciously want to cultivate for families?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things that you can do with your family is to set aside the protected time that you're going to have with your partner. And it's okay for kids to get the message that, hey, this is going to be mommy, daddy time. And if you let them know that from early on, then that gets respected. And it's important to be protected because you have to have that space. And I talk about in Wanting to Want, I also talk about making space for the erotic. And that is as much physical space, like time and location, as it is mental space of thinking about things in a more erotic, sexual way. And kids are okay if they know that you have protected mommy and daddy time. I think that that's important for them to understand, and they will respect it if you also respect it. And I think that they need to understand that adults are going to have their time. And again, as I mentioned before, you are modeling for them in everything that you do. You're demonstrating to them what, their picture of an ideal or a healthy relationship is going to be like. And so to be able to be affectionate with your partner appropriately in front of them is okay. And that means that it's probably okay to hug, and it's okay to show each other that you care about each other and give each other loving kisses. You're not going to be, crazy making out foreplay in front of them. You're going to have protected mommy and daddy time where you do that elsewhere. And that helps them establish their boundaries too. And you might find that you need to set boundaries with them too. For example, a lot of toddlers will start masturbating, and you need to be able to set limits with them and say, okay, you know what, that if you're going to do that, then you have to do that in private. That has to be your own private time, so that they start to learn boundaries. Okay, that's something that I'm going to do in private. There's no shaming. It's really about setting appropriate boundaries. And so that's the same thing. You want them to grow up not anxious about sex, not fearful about sex, not feeling like sex is dirty. And so you don't want to completely pretend like you don't have any sex at all in your relationship with your partner, because that's sending a awkward message of like, we don't even talk about it, we don't do it, it's, it doesn't exist. That's not a healthy message. But then you also don't want to be right there always in front of them. That's too stimulating for them. Then there's no boundaries and they don't know where to set that. So appropriate, hey, mommy and daddy have their time, and this is mommy and daddy time, and that's okay, and that's healthy.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's such a fascinating thing to kind of differentiate with, of like, it's there, but it's not in your face for kids. Mm-hmm. And, I had this conversation. I want to ask you about this too. I had it with a midwife, a home birth midwife, and I said, what about like for very young, newborns, infants that are co-sleeping with parents, how, I'm like, what do you do when you want to have sex? And she said when they're really young, it's not a big deal to have sex in the same bed with them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So what does she define as really little?
That's a good question, and we didn't differentiate the age cutoff. So we were just talking about like a nursing mother, co-sleeping, infant. We didn't say up until what age.
Because I would say a couple of months, it's probably not an issue. But after a couple of months, when a baby starts to really understand the difference between, you're a separate person from me, because in the beginning they don't even really understand their separateness from other people. Just not so much for the infant, but again, I really stress for the mom to be able to really focus on what she's doing. Women's brains are so complex, and we are wired to pay attention to every tiny little detail, and we have to. But what I tell people, that's what gets, children fed and the family together, is that we pay attention to details. So if the baby's there in the bed with you, it's going to be so much more difficult for you to just relax and be in the moment, because part of your attention will always be on that. You have to, because you have to make sure that you're not going to be, falling on top of them, or they're not going to be falling off the bed, or, so you can't possibly 100% be lost in the moment if the baby's in the bed. So I think that when they're very tiny infants, if you really feel like that is the only arrangement, then I don't think it's going to harm the baby, but I don't think you're going to be able to fully concentrate on what's happening and get lost in the moment. And I think once the baby is old enough as an infant to start moving around in the bed, you probably want to have him or her be in her own crib, so that you can just relax and not have to worry about them getting hurt in any way physically, So there's the psychological aspect of it, and then there's the physical aspect of it too.
That's such a good point. Like if the baby is starting to move around, you're going to get distracted, and you're going to be like, oh, you got to make sure the baby doesn't, go over the edge, or, even if they're in the co-sleeper, there's just not that relaxation component that is important. There is that distraction. So, even if, you're co-sleeping and you get them back into bed with you afterwards, it's just probably allowing that time for you and your partner to just really be having partner time.
Right. I mean, and even without words, in a nonverbal way, when you're moving them to another area and you have your time in bed, that is like setting the limits of mommy and daddy time, and that's okay. That's totally okay.
Thank you for really, elaborating on that, because I think there is a lot of guilt for moms that they want to just like, oh, I really can't ever separate from my baby. The baby always wants to be, nursing or laying on me or next to me or being worn, and it just almost becomes suffocating for some mothers, and they need a break. But then if they set the baby down, the baby's crying, and it's because the baby, there has to be almost some boundaries, and this isn't necessarily like a sleep training. This is just like, I think it's important for moms to recognize that boundaries are still important, even when they're little.
Yeah. And again, I go back to this idea of, how we evolved, and when we had these societies where the care of infants would be shared among lots of different people, men and women, and multi-generational, right, then the baby would not be necessarily demanding of one person, because they would be much more accustomed to being passed from one to the other. And certainly they would have their attachment to their mom that would be special and stronger than with other people, but that doesn't mean that they would not be able to be passed from one person to another. And so I think that that's important to understand too. And you're right, the guilt that some mothers feel prevents them from allowing themselves to have that space. So, yeah.
Right. Or almost, there's either that guilt, or there's also like, well, no one can do this as good as me, so I just have to keep sacrificing myself to take care of this child. And, having other people watch the baby, hold the baby, they're not replacing the mother's role. They're just, supportive, like a supporting role. Right,
and I think it's so important that early on you strike a balance between the giving part and the part that is regenerating for yourself. Because if you are completely in self-sacrifice mode, then what are you teaching your child? You're teaching them also that you should never, put yourself first, that you should just give, no matter what it takes from you. And that's not necessarily balanced. And I don't think that for their kids either. I think they want them to learn to grow in a balanced way, where they see a combination of I give, I love, but I also take care of myself and allow myself to regenerate and, restore what I need to, so I can keep giving.
Right. Yeah, filling up your own cup so you have it overflowing to give to others, as opposed to just depleting. And really, I mean, I see so many women that are in that model of depletion, and, it just creates havoc. It wreaks havoc on their body.
Well, yeah, because it gets translated physically after a while, right?
Yeah, definitely it does. Wow. Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I think that, just remember that each pregnancy can be different, and what you feel in one, as far as how you feel physically or how much desire you might have, all that can change from one to another. One of the things I do talk about in the book, too, is expectations. I think it's important to understand that if you have expectations that are very, very either idealized on one side or very, very negative on the other, and you're really using those as a marker for what you should be doing, then that could be problematic. So I think just let whatever's going to come, and then you can work with it much more easily that way, rather than setting yourself up for these crazy expectations either that you can't meet or these very negative expectations that get translated into your own reality in your body. So keep yourself open to what the universe has to bring.
Very well put. So, Madeleine, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this amazing wisdom with women regarding their sexuality.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.